choice. There are those out there, subversive sorts who would have you believe what they want you to believe, who tell you that there's no such thing as choice. That it is in fact an illusion, created to make you feel powerful, where you are in fact as weak as a kitten, as an infant. Well, I'm here to shatter these myths. The Xbox Games Pass for Windows gives you that torrent of options, that deluge of decisions. There is such a wealth of choice in fact that it can be simply overwhelming. I am merely your humble maitre d', serving you the choicest choices from which to choose. My name is not important, and I don't know about you, but I keep getting interrupted by cannon fire. Yeah, like that. Honourable mention, Pathologic 2. This list was pretty tough to nail down compared to others, particularly because there are so many well-regarded games on it. The first handful of titles on this list all scored 8.5 with users, so I cross-referenced them with their Metacritic scores in order to create a definitive ranking. This game then, by rights, is equally well regarded by the gaming community, but just didn't quite make the cut. This surreal, seemingly divisive first-person survival game is a reboot of the 2005 original, set in a mysterious plague-hit town. Perhaps a subject matter that's a little too real for some people in 2020? Number 10, Alien Isolation. Officially the best thing in the Alien franchise since 1986, this genuinely scary survival horror deserves better than to be edged out of the top 10 on a technicality. Playing as Amanda Ripley, daughter of movie protagonist Ellen Ripley, you arrive on disaster-stricken Sevastopol Station to find out what happened to your mother 15 years after her disappearance. Alien Isolation builds a believable world where the social order within the station has broken down, and your investigation turns into a fight for survival as it becomes apparent that the eponymous alien is loose on the station. The game's graphics are not only superb, they are incredibly evocative of the world created in the 1979 original movie, with such hallmarks as retro-futuristic computers and machines, selectively functional electrical equipment, and, of course, untrustworthy AI. Also noteworthy is the sound design, where groans and creaks and crashes combine with the soundtrack to leave you constantly second-guessing your movements, always uncertain as to whether the noise you just heard was an ambient sound or a prelude to an attack. Alien Isolation earns its spot in the 8.5 club and is well worth a play if you're a fan of the movies or horror in general. Number 9, Hotline Miami, Shadow Tactics Blades of the Shogun, and the Talos Principle. Hotline Miami is a 2012 uber-violent retro-themed top-down shooter from developers Denaton and legendary indie publisher Devolver Digital. An exercise in precision timing and trial and error. Taking inspiration from dark action movies, your character is asked to approach each level in turn and, room by room, proceed to kill everyone in it. Even through the pixel art, it's not hard to see the mess of blood and guts at the end of a level and think, I made that. Wait, I made that? Shadow Tactics Blades of the Shogun is a sort of Hitman-style stealth assassination game crossed with squad-based tactical real-time strategy. Set in a version of Edo-era Japan, you must use your team's assorted special abilities to infiltrate fortresses, steal documents, kidnap and assassinate targets, and commit sabotage in order to overthrow a warlord who threatens to plunge the country into chaos. The Talos Principle is another Devolver publication, this time from Crow Team. This first-person puzzle game first released in 2014 and was an instant success with its mix of engaging puzzles and thought-provoking narrative. What starts as a simple premise whereby the player controls an android solving puzzles at the behest of the puzzle's creator evolves into a greater story about the future of artificial intelligence and humanity. Number 8, Subnautica. Subnautica places you in the unenviable role of Kevin Costner in the movie Waterworld. Your spacecraft has crash-landed in the sea of an alien world. You have nothing but your PDA, your damaged escape pod and its replicator to rely on, and no way of escape. Your immediate goal is survival, living off the sea creatures, plants and other harvestable resources around you in order to adapt to the harsh climate, overcome the obstacles the story throws at you, and eventually build yourself a means of escape. Subnautica's art style and music create an immense sense of calm. The seas are beautifully rendered, the flora and fauna are mostly quite relaxing to just swim through, and the day-night cycle causes colour and light shifts that are quite beautiful. In the handful of hours I played in order to grab this footage, after solving my immediate concerns for food and water, I settled into a rhythm that could almost be considered idyllic. I sort of don't mind if I never progress beyond this basic stage of fishing, harvesting and breaking down rocks for resources. Besides, I'm not sure there's anything out there in space I'd rather be doing anyway. Just edging into 8th place by virtue of its critics' metascore of 87, Subnautica joins the rest of the gang with a user score of 8.5. Number 7, Ori and the Will of the Wisps. This sequel to Ori and the Blind Forest is a stunning, ethereal Metroidvania carrying on the story from the end of the previous game. This time, the Miyazaki-inspired story follows Ori through a new forest in search of a missing friend, solving puzzles and fighting enemies along the way. Will of the Wisps is perhaps more combat-focused than its predecessor, and features more free-form upgrades as well as a less involved, more streamlined save system. The twilight-hued art style is beautiful, with its stunning 3D rendered visuals and noticeable upgrade from the first game. Partnered with an atmospheric soundtrack that perfectly underscores the action on screen, Will of the Wisps is an audiovisual masterpiece. Gameplay, however, isn't without its flaws, with some pointing out the repetitive combat as a weak area, but most agree that the game is well worth your time. Overall reviews were positive, resulting in a user score of 8.5, and given that at the time of writing it is in fact still a new release, this inclusion makes the cost of the Xbox Game Pass for PC worth it all by itself. Number 6, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. Like Ori, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons is a game that isn't afraid of tugging on the heartstrings a little. This unique puzzle adventure game, developed by Starbreeze Studios in 2013, has you play as both of the brothers of the title simultaneously, with each controlled by one half of the gamepad. The game's puzzles usually require you to use both brothers in tandem to clear obstacles, distract NPCs, or make use of one character's unique attributes. The game's story is told primarily through the use of body language or the environment. I can't tell you too much of the plot without venturing into spoiler territory, but the synopsis is that the two brothers set off to save their dying father and are beset by challenges, obstacles and distractions along the way. Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons has proven to be a hit with audiences, praised for its emotive animation, attractive art style and touching narrative, comparing it favourably to classics of the art game subgenre like Eco, Journey and Limbo, and rewarding it with a score of 8.5. If you're enjoying the video so far and want to show your support for the channel, a like would be appreciated, and subscribing and activating notifications will let you know when I post new content. Thanks. Number 5, A Plague Tale: Innocence. Hope you don't mind rats, folks, cause A Plague Tale: Innocence has all of them. Deftly mixing third-person stealth and puzzle mechanics with survival horror and some light action thrown in for good measure, this period piece takes you through a fictionalised version of medieval Europe during the Black Death, controlling the game's heroine Amicia as she and her brother Hugo navigate through a land plagued by supernatural swarms of rats. And I mean swarms. Seriously, if you have a phobia, you might want to skip this game altogether. A fairly linear experience, most of the game's problems have highlighted solutions that simply require your timing and some skill to resolve them. Instead, you're along for the ride, here to experience the story and appreciate the atmosphere. A Plague Tale is an uncommonly good-looking game, with realistic character design, lighting, scenery and effects that wouldn't look out of place in a AAA game. The rat swarm system in particular is incredibly striking, if your nerves can take it. A Plague Tale: Innocence has been well received by gamers, who have awarded it an aggregate score of 8.6. Number 4, The Bard's Tale Trilogy. No, you didn't wake up from a coma to find out the last 30 years were all a dream. Developers In Exile Entertainment took the time to remaster these classic dungeon crawls from the mid to late 80s and release them to the world in 2018. Faithful to the structure and spirit of the original games, the gameplay and art style may come off as primitive to those more used to The Witcher 3 or even Diablo. with static backgrounds, NPCs represented by simple portraits, simple 4-directional movement, tank controls, and a turn-based combat system that feels somewhere between paper-based RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons and 90s computer RPGs like Final Fantasy. This trilogy is actually more like 3 chapters in a story, as each loads in a virtually identical engine with minor visual differences. The 3rd chapter in particular reflects the most change, with a different atmosphere, more frivolous dialogue, and more varied combat encounters. For those who grew up with games like this, the Bard's Tale Trilogy is a pleasantly accessible way of reliving your gaming past. For more modern gamers, this is still a fun, if slightly archaic, look at how far we've come in some 3.5 decades of RPG development. Players of the Bard's Tale Trilogy have rated this game an impressive 8.6 out of 10. Number 3. Europa Universalis 4. In my previous list on the Xbox Game Pass for PC, I started the entry on Europa Universalis 4 with a warning that if you're not into strategy games, this probably isn't for you. If, however, this kind of massive, in-depth, world-conquering simulator is your deal, then Europa Universalis is worth the price of admission. Developed by Paradox and released in 2013, this is the game you graduate to from civilization. Starting off in your choice of one of 500 historical nations, growing your nation as you see fit. You play against either the computer or other humans via LAN or internet modes, but be prepared to sink several days of your life into even a single campaign. The developers of Europa Universalis know exactly how daunting a challenge this can be, and as such the tutorial is an absolute must for newcomers. This is not for the faint of heart or for casual gamers. And man was this a slog to capture footage of. I'm really not the target market for this game. It seems that the actual target market really appreciate it as much as the reviewing community does though, as the user score of 8.7 is a perfect match for its Metacritic score. Number 2. Ori and the Blind Forest. The first game in the Ori series was a breath of fresh air, standing apart from the crowd of similar titles by dint of its presentation alone. Its ethereal world told in warm and cool tones, small pools of light and swathes of darkness, crafted in a modern 3D graphics engine yet evocative of something inked or painted. Its gameplay didn't disappoint either, with a moderate difficulty curve, intuitive set of controls, and rewarding progression system. So, is Blind Forest the better game? The original game in the Metroidvania-style series of ethereal platformers has received better feedback from gamers than its sequel. It seems that a niche of gamers prefer the original's more complex systems and feel the sequel is dumbed down somehow. A larger set of user reviews for Will of the Wisps talks about poor performance, bugs and glitches, some of them game-breaking. Whether these problems will be ironed out in time, whether they have already, and whether subsequent future user reviews will balance out the earlier negative ones, can't be predicted. However, I for one feel more engaged and inclined to progress further into Will of the Wisps than Blind Forest, though revisiting the first game after playing the sequel made me appreciate it even more. Ori and the Blind Forest is held off the top spot by a small margin, scoring 8.8 in user reviews. Number 1. Hollow Knight. Another entry in the list that is often categorised as a Metroidvania, Hollow Knight casts the player as the hero, an insect-like character known only as Knight, hunting in the dark underground kingdom of Hallownest, where you must uncover the source of the infection that is driving the population insane. Unlike the similar titles elsewhere on this list, Hollow Knight's visual style is more akin to traditional hand-drawn animation, with a curiously dark mix of gothic themes and slightly cutesy character design that reminded me of illustrations by Edward Gorey and Tim Burton. Hollow Knight's learning curve is on the steep side, with developers Team Cherry having taken a few leaves from the From Software book. Combat takes place through melee attacks or ranged spells, and rewards players with Soul, a resource that allows the player to heal, and Geo, which is an in-game currency. Death in combat comes frequently, and causes the player to lose their Geo and limit the amount of Soul they can carry. In order to regain their lost money and Soul, players must return to the site of their previous death and defeat their own ghost. It's not for nothing that many commentators hype up Hollow Knight as a kind of 2D Dark Souls, and while this isn't wholly true, the game has enough of its own identity in its visual style and story, and the combat system requires a somewhat different skill set to that of the Soulsborne series. It's clear that the developers took some inspiration from similar sources, and I can imagine there'd be some crossover in the game's respective audiences. Hollow Knight is a deep, challenging Metroidvania with a ton of style layered over plenty of substance, and has earned itself a 9 out of 10 with gamers, which, by that metric, makes it officially the best game available on the Xbox Game Pass for PC. After 2 whole lists on the Game Pass, barely any mention of the big titles like Gears or Halo. Which other games are conspicuous by their absence? Let me know below, and while you're down there, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.